He didn't raise his voice. Didn't frown, didn't even pause. He just said it like it was no big deal. "You're too old to be a mom, Meredith." And then he went right back to eating like he just told me we were out of milk. I sat there holding my chopsticks, watching the steam rise off a plate of pad thai we'd ordered from the same place for years. The noodles had gone cold, but that didn't matter anymore. What do you say to that? To someone you've built a home with a history with someone who once kissed your belly and whispered, "We'll get there someday." You don't say anything, you just hear it and try to breathe around it. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the plate across the room. I just looked at him. And I remember thinking, asterisk, asterisk. That's it. That's the moment I became invisible. Asterisk, asterisk. We'd promised one more cycle. One last round of IVF, then we decide what came next. Together. But somewhere between then and now together turned into you. I guess I should have seen it coming. The way he'd been coming home later. The way he stopped asking about appointments. The way he touched my back like it was a task. Still, hearing it out loud broke something. I told him I had the appointment set. That the embryos were frozen, that the clinic said we could go ahead. He looked at me like a man trying to be polite to a stranger. "It's time we let that dream go," he said. I stared at the table. At the soft drip of wax from the candle, at his plate almost empty. And I said, "Then I'll go alone." He didn't argue. Didn't ask me why. Didn't offer to drive me. Didn't even ask if I was serious. He just nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. That night we watched television in silence. I sat on the far end of the couch, legs curled under me, arms crossed. He scrolled his phone. When I went to bed, he stayed in the living room. I heard the glow of the screen behind the bedroom door until almost midnight. And I knew. He was already gone. The next few days were like watching someone pack without packing. Little things disappeared: his brown shoes from the mat, his razor from the sink, the worn green hoodie I always borrowed when it got cold. And then on a Thursday I came home to find a manila envelope on the counter. No note. No talk. Just my name typed clean on the front. Inside, divorce papers. Signed, ready. I heard him in the bedroom folding a sweater. I didn't ask anything. He didn't explain. He said, "I'm not staying tonight." And zipped the bag shut. He left without touching me. No hug. No goodbye. Just keys in his hand and the sound of the door closing. It was strange how quiet everything got after he left. How loud the refrigerator seemed. How I could hear every tick of the clock in the dining room. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the consent form. I had filled in my name. The dates. Everything. Except his. I folded it slowly. Pressed down each crease. Then I walked to the fridge and slipped it under the same magnet that held a photo of us from a vacation in Mendocino, the one where we'd laughed until we cried because he forgot the tent poles. I didn't throw it away. I didn't erase anything. I just put it there, next to the version of us that used to believe in forever. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I saw it. His wedding ring sitting on the edge of the sink. Right where he left it. I didn't touch it. I didn't move it. I turned off the light and walked out of the room. And the next morning, with the sky still gray and my coffee still too bitter, I opened my email. And there it was. Subject line: Northwest Fertility Egg Retrieval Appointment Confirmed. Asterisk. Asterisk. Date the 7th of December. 7:15 a.m. I stared at it for a while. Then I closed the laptop. And I sat there alone in the kitchen we used to share, listening to the hum of the fridge and the soft patter of rain. It was quiet, but not empty. Something had begun. I walked into the clinic alone. No husband beside me. No hand to squeeze. No voice saying it'll be okay. Just me. And a quiet kind of courage I didn't even know I had. The front desk smelled the same disinfectant and lemon. There was soft instrumental music playing over the ceiling speakers, a playlist designed not to offend anyone, not to stir too much emotion. But my body remembered. The creak of the waiting room chair. The laminated clipboard. The faint hum of the hallway heater trying to keep the December air at bay. I had sat in that exact room before, with Daniel's hand wrapped around mine and his voice in my ear whispering, "We've got this." Back then, I believed him. Now I sat with my coat still on, arms folded. No hand to hold. No whispered promises. Just me. And muscle memory. "Meredith Lane," the nurse called. I stood, slowly nodded, and followed her down the familiar hallway lined with soft focus photos of sleeping babies and hopeful-looking couples. Nurse Janelle still had the same kind eyes. She didn't say much, just gave me a small smile and offered a box of tissues before I even asked. Not that I cried. I didn't. There's something about going through this alone that doesn't leave much room for tears. You either show up or you don't. I showed up. Dr. Choi greeted me like she always had. Warm, steady, never overreaching. Her office still had that faint scent of lavender and antiseptic, like someone had tried to make a sterile place feel human. "I see we're using embryos from last year's cycle," she said, her voice low and professional. I nodded. Yes. Just me this time. She didn't ask why. Didn't look surprised. Just flipped through the chart, then handed me a new set of consent forms. Solo consent. There it was in clean black print. I signed where I was supposed to, line after line, my name, slowly filling all the empty spaces where Daniel's used to be. When I handed the forms back, Dr. Choi looked me in the eye and said only one thing. "You're brave." It didn't feel like bravery. It felt like standing in the middle of a bridge that was already half burned behind me. But I nodded anyway. Because what else could I do? Some days survival is quieter than people think. The procedure room was quiet. Not the kind of cold you see in hospital shows, all bright lights and people rushing around. This was soft. Dim. Almost too calm, like the room was holding its breath with me. I changed into the gown, folded my clothes neatly on the chair. It felt like something sacred, even though there was no ceremony. The nurse dimmed the lights. She placed a warm blanket over my legs. Her hands were steady, practiced. Dr. Choi walked in, mask on, but I could still see the kindness in her eyes. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. Truth was, I didn't feel ready. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't see. But I said yes. Because sometimes that's all you can do, say yes to the next thing, even if your knees are shaking. The transfer didn't take long. 5 minutes. Maybe less. But my mind stretched it out, clinging to every beep, every sterile sound, every quiet voice in the room. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. There was a painting up there, a watercolor of a tree in autumn. Its leaves were halfway gone. Bare branches reaching, still standing. I thought about that tree. How it looked like it had lost everything. But really it was just waiting. When it was over, Dr. Choi touched my hand lightly through her glove. "Take it easy for the rest of the day. No lifting, no stress, just rest." I nodded again. I'd become good at nodding. I got dressed slowly, buttoned my coat, wrapped my scarf tight, and I walked out into the December air, cold and biting, but somehow cleaner than when I'd walked in. The city moved around me, cars honking, people talking, lights blinking red and green across crosswalks. But I was somewhere else. Somewhere inside that moment where something microscopic, something mine was trying to begin. That evening I didn't turn on the television. Didn't check email, didn't call anyone. I boiled water and steeped loose leaf tea, jasmine green, the one I used to drink in college during exams. I stood by the stove breathing in the steam, counting out the minutes. 3 minutes for steeping. 2 more for silence. On the fridge, I pinned up the printed embryo photo. A little black dot inside a cloudy oval. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing. To me, it looked like a future. I didn't talk to it, not right away. That first night, I just looked at it. Let it be there, present, visible. Later, when the sky turned dark and the wind brushed against the window glass, I sat down in the armchair by the heater with a pair of needles and soft gray yarn. I'd bought it months ago, back when Daniel was still trying to pretend we were okay. I said it was for a scarf, but I knew. Even then, my fingers worked slow, stitch after stitch, forming the curve of a sock smaller than my palm. I didn't name anything, didn't dream too far ahead. But the rhythm of the knitting helped. It gave the ache somewhere to go. I kept everything to myself. No one knew, not my sister, not my coworker Jen, not even Dr. Choi's assistant, who smiled too warmly every time I came in. This wasn't something I wanted to explain. It was mine. Entirely. Some people grieve by talking. I've always been the kind to grieve by folding. That week I washed a small stack of onesies I had bought quietly on clearance. Pale yellow, no print, no assumptions. I dried them in the evening air and folded them wearing gloves, not because they were delicate, but because it made me feel like I was preparing something sacred. I placed them in a shoebox lined with tissue paper and slid it under the bed. Not to hide. Just to keep safe. Sometimes when everything else in your life feels uncertain, you create rituals, small quiet habits that keep your heart from unraveling. Mine were tea gray yarn and a black and white embryo photo taped to a fridge no one else opened anymore. The call came earlier than I expected. It was still dark. The kind of dark that makes you second-guess the time when you roll over and check your phone. 6:53 a.m. I stared at the screen for a long second. Blocked the instinct to hit decline, because a part of me already knew. Today would change something. I picked up on the third ring. Hello. The voice on the other end was soft, almost hesitant. Meredith. This is Nurse Janelle from Northwest. I sat up slowly. Felt the way my body shifted, bracing. We got your beta numbers back. A pause. And then, congratulations, you're pregnant. I didn't cry, didn't gasp, didn't fall back against the pillows like in the movies. Instead, I blinked. Once. Twice. And let the sentence land fully in the room. I'm pregnant. I repeated, not because I didn't hear her, but because I wanted the air to carry it differently if it came from me. Yes, she said, her smile somehow audible. We'll want to schedule a follow-up in a few days. But right now, this is good news. Very good news. I thanked her. Wrote the date down with the same pen I'd used to sign the solo consent forms. Then placed the phone down gently beside my tea mug, still warm from earlier. I sat there in silence. Longer than I meant to. No one to wake. No hand to reach across the bed. Just me. And a word I hadn't let myself think about in weeks, mother. I whispered it. Quietly. To the window. To the cold air that lingered despite the heater humming. Not because I needed someone to hear it, but because I needed to believe I could say it without falling apart. I reached for the tiny gray sock resting in my drawer, ran my thumb along the edge. The yarn felt softer than I remembered. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about Daniel, or what he'd said, or how quickly he'd disappeared. I was thinking about something smaller, something trying to become real inside me. And for the first time in months, I let my shoulders drop. Not in defeat, but in surrender to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone anymore. I made oatmeal that morning. Slow. With cinnamon and almond milk the way I used to when things felt steady. Not for the nutrients. Not even out of hunger. But because my hands needed to do something ordinary. Something that said, "You're still here, you're still capable." The kitchen window fogged up from the steam. Outside, the sky was still shy with light, just the faintest suggestion of morning. I reached for the small photo they'd given me at the clinic. The embryo. It looked like a blur, a cloud inside a darker cloud. No form, no features. And yet I talked to it anyway. I told it what the weather was like. How there were leftovers in the fridge. That if it stayed, I'd make room for books and stuffed animals and slow Sundays with pancakes. I didn't promise it a perfect life. I just promised I'd be here. For real. Later that afternoon, I pulled out the little box from the top shelf. The one with the onesies I never had the courage to donate. I folded one. Soft cotton, pale yellow with tiny stars. Slipped it into the drawer next to my socks. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a place. A place for something new to begin. And then before I closed the drawer, I said it out loud. Not to the baby. Not to the room. To myself. You're not too old, you're exactly on time. I didn't know who needed to hear it more, me now, or the me that had been waiting in silence for years. But once it was out there floating in the warm hush of my kitchen, I believed it. I really did. I wasn't invited to the proposal. But I saw it anyway at exactly 8:03 that morning. The television in the faculty lounge was already on. Muted. But the captions were clear enough. Breaking Channel 6's Lila Monroe says yes on air. I recognized the backdrop before I registered the faces. The rooftop restaurant in downtown Portland. We'd been there once for our 10th anniversary. And there he was. Daniel. Kneeling on one knee in that same navy jacket I bought him 2 Christmases ago. Smiling. Not his usual camera-ready smirk, but something softer, younger. Something I hadn't seen in years. Lila Monroe giggled. Held up her hand like she'd won a trophy. That ring. It looked familiar. Big, shiny, diamond, heavy. She turned toward him and he mouthed the words. Finally. Behind me, someone dropped a spoon. Toast crumbs crunched under my shoes. I don't know how long I stood there watching 2 people rehearse joy in the most public way possible. But I do remember Jen, my coworker with the knit cardigans and too many cat mugs, pressing a tissue packet into my palm. No words, just that. The tissue was warm from her pocket. And that was the only warm thing in the room. The anchor asked a question I didn't catch, but Daniel's answer was impossible to miss. We're just over the moon. We can't wait to build a family together. That word, family, landed like a slow punch. I think I blinked. Or maybe my eyes just couldn't stay dry anymore. The screen showed him holding Leela close, his hand resting on the small of her back the way he used to touch mine when we hosted dinner parties. When we still had guests. When we still believed in someday. I picked up my coffee cup, lukewarm now, and tried to take a sip. My hand shook just enough to spill it down my blouse. Jen moved quickly. A napkin. A glance that said "I'm here," without making anything worse. It's a nice ring, she said, like she had to say something. I nodded. Because I didn't trust my voice. Inside me, something curled inward. Not in anger. Not yet. but an awareness like a line had finally been drawn. He'd told me I was too old, too late, too tired to try again. But now he was making promises on live television with the same mouth that once whispered, "It'll be you and me, no matter what." Promises didn't die. They just changed addresses. And apparently time zones. 3 days later, it arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold trim so thick you'd think it contained a royal decree. No return address. But I knew. Inside, a thick cardstock invitation embossed elegant, painfully tasteful. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Lila Monroe and Daniel Lane at Fairgrove Vineyards Saturday, the 18th of June, 4 p.m. Formal attire. Sunset vows. Reception to follow. There was a tiny wax seal with their initials D and L, like something carved into a tree where my name had been erased. I didn't cry. I didn't rip it up. I didn't even set it down right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, made myself a cup of mint tea, held the warmth in my palms, let the silence press around me like a coat. Then I went to the study. Second drawer. Filing cabinet I hadn't touched in months. I opened it. My fingers knew where to go past old tax returns, warranties, expired insurance. And there it was, an envelope. Plain, labeled in blue pen, NWF G12 21st. Asterisk. Northwest Fertility and Genetics. I pulled it out. Saturday down at my desk. Opened the flap. Inside the summary sheet. My name. The procedure date. Pregnancy result. Positive. Asterisk. And under sperm donor typed so plainly it almost looked like a clerical error. Daniel Lane. I stared at his name. Printed in sterile ink. No emotion. Just 2 words that used to mean everything, now reduced to a line on a form. There was no legal claim to make. No confrontation to stage. Just a truth. Sitting in my hands. A truth no one else knew. I held that paper for a long time. Let its weight settle into me. Not heavy, not cruel, just still. Then I folded it carefully. Not rushed. Corner to corner, like something worth preserving. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a new envelope. One without wrinkles or dust. Slipped the document inside, pressed the seal shut. I picked up a black pen. And without thinking, without blinking, I wrote 1 word on the front. Gift. Asterisk. Asterisk. That was what it was now. Not evidence. Not revenge. Just a seed of clarity waiting for its season. I placed the envelope back in the drawer next to an old birthday card from my sister, a faded ultrasound from the first failed round, and a gray knit sock I never finished. And I smiled. Not out of joy, but out of alignment. Like something in me had snapped into place. Quietly. Without applause. Without needing anyone to notice. A magnet shaped like a lemon. Next to it a note I once wrote in marker, "You are already loved." I almost reached to take the note down. Then stopped. Number. It wasn't just about hope anymore. It was about history. And I had the receipts to prove it. The next morning, before the world remembered to be loud again, I slipped the envelope into the back of my dresser drawer. Behind a velvet box of earrings I hadn't worn since the night he left. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. One day someone would ask how this all began. And I would have something to show them, not out of bitterness, not out of pride. But because sometimes the proof of survival isn't in what we scream, it's in what we choose to carry. And when we choose to reveal it. And for the first time in a long time I heard myself exhale, not shaky, not held back. Just whole. I smiled. Not the kind you force for company, but the kind that happens when you finally realize you're not waiting anymore. You're ready. And he doesn't even know what's coming. She looked radiant. That was the word people kept whispering as she floated down the aisle, white lace trailing behind her like morning mist. Lila Monroe, now soon to be Lila Lane, smiled like someone who'd never been lied to. Someone who believed in forever, because no one had ever handed her evidence otherwise. I stood near the back. No seat, no invitation. Just the quiet confidence that comes from knowing I wasn't crashing the wedding. I was delivering a message. 6 months pregnant. Navy silk wrap dress hugging the curve of what they thought I'd never have. A coat draped over my shoulders. Hair pulled back not to impress, just to stay out of my way. No one recognized me at first. The string lights helped, so did the way most guests were already half buzzed on champagne and curated jazz. But Daniel saw me. Not right away. Not when he stood at the altar beaming like he'd won a prize, but when the crowd shifted during the recessional and my silhouette caught the edge of his vision. His smile didn't break. He was too trained for that. But I saw it, the twitch at his jaw. The way his hand gripped the glass a little too hard. I didn't wave. Didn't flinch. Just let the breeze catch the hem of my dress and stood still like part of the landscape. Aunt Beth noticed me. Of course she did. She'd always been the one who saw what others didn't. She walked over slowly, soft hands and even softer voice. No one told me you'd be here. I wasn't sure I would be, I said. Her eyes dropped to my belly, then back to my face. But she didn't ask. Didn't need to. She just hugged me. The kind of hug that says, I don't know what this is, but I trust that you do. Asterisk. I stayed near the hydrangeas. No one offered me a seat. That was fine. I wasn't there to be welcomed. I was there to witness. The jazz trio played something old and sweet, like the soundtrack of a commercial or a memory someone wanted to believe had always been happy. The clinking of flutes, the rustle of chiffon, and cashmere, the low hum of toasts rising with the sun slipping west. Daniel gave his speech first. Talked about love being unexpected, about new beginnings, about finally finding peace. He didn't look at me, didn't say my name, but every syllable was calculated to sound sincere. Lila glowed beside him, a walking daydream in soft ivory and pale rose lipstick. She thanked the guests, shared a funny story about their first date, giggled when Daniel kissed her knuckles. Then she raised her glass. One day, she said, eyes bright and voice full, we'll have a big family. Maybe even 5 kids, who knows? Laughter. Applause. Even the violinist chuckled. I took one breath in. Held it. Then stepped forward slowly, carefully, like someone not trying to interrupt, just participate. I didn't clear my throat, didn't call attention. Just walked to their table and waited for her to see me. She did. Her smile faltered just a bit. Not recognition, just uncertainty. Hi, I said. Calm. Even. I won't stay. I just wanted to leave something with you. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a small white envelope, no name on it, but the weight unmistakable. Lila blinked. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it. What is this? I smiled like someone handing over directions, not a detour. Just thought you'd want to read this, I said. Before the cake. She turned the envelope over in her hand as if trying to guess its weight, its purpose. Still smiling, but thinner now. Like someone performing through fog. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. His eyes flicked from the envelope to my face. Then back again. And I saw at the exact second he knew what it might be. Not a bomb. Not a letter, worse. Truth. On paper. With his name typed cleanly in the top margin. Lila slipped one finger under the flap, tore gently, unfolded. I could see the gold trim of her wedding program in her other hand, still held like a shield, but the page inside the envelope stole her grip. She read the top line silently, then read it again, this time, her lips moving ever so slightly. Northwest Fertility and Genetics Institute summary receipt, patient Dr. Meredith Lane, paternal specimen Daniel Lane. Her pupils didn't dilate. They shrank. The color left her cheeks, but not in waves, in a single rush, as if her skin realized something before her mind could catch up. One fork clattered to the ground. A pause in the violin, then a sharp metallic silence. No gasps, no screams. Just a space between notes where understanding lived. Daniel didn't move. Didn't even swallow. His knuckles whitened around the champagne flute until the rim trembled. Someone whispered, "What's wrong?" but no one answered. Even the breeze had gone still. Even the trees, the tall rust-colored maples that had framed the ceremony like a painting, seemed to stop swaying. And Lila, to her credit, didn't cry. She just turned to Daniel, tilted her head, still holding the receipt in one hand, the other letting go of his. I didn't need to stay to see what came next. I turned before anyone could say my name, not in shame, not in triumph. Just because the moment had ended. My role had been brief but precise, and I had no interest in the aftermath. The grass under my heels felt firmer as I walked toward the gravel path. Away from string lights, away from frozen smiles. My hand found its place resting gently on the round curve beneath my dress. It wasn't a statement, it wasn't a display. It was just me, and her, or him. The life I had chosen to carry, the only guest I'd ever need. Behind me I heard nothing. No footsteps. No one calling after me. That was the truest gift. The quiet. Aunt Beth stood by the gate. She didn't ask questions. Just reached for my hand and squeezed once, firm and warm and knowing. "I always believed you'd be a mother," she said softly. I nodded. Didn't need to reply. We both understood the kind of faith that doesn't require noise. The kind that lives in actions, in the way someone shows up, speaks carefully, leaves clean. I reached the sidewalk just as a light breeze picked up again. Almost as if the world had waited, held its breath until I'd stepped outside the frame. No applause, no music swell, only the rustle of fallen leaves and the smallest kick, low and steady beneath my ribs. It felt like an answer. I let myself into the house with the same key I'd never changed. The townhouse was quiet, dim but not sad, just settled. The air still carried a faint trace of the candle I used to burn vanilla and rosemary. There were no shoes by the door. No overcoat draped on the banister. Only me. And the memory of where things used to be. I slipped off my flats and walked into the kitchen, the wooden floor creaking just enough to remind me I was home. I opened the fridge. Not for food. Just out of habit. Out of ritual. The photo was still there, magnetized to the stainless steel next to a small folded paper. Daniel's face beamed back at me from that old vacation shot, sunglasses, crooked hand resting on my shoulder. We were smiling into the sun like we thought it would always shine that way. Beside it, the IVF consent form. Still creased where I'd folded it, still untouched. I'd left it there the day he walked out. Hadn't moved it since. I reached up and gently peeled it down. Not to throw it away, just to clear space. The fridge door closed with a soft click. I stood still, listened. Nothing but the faint hum of the motor and the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I exhaled, slow and even. There were no echoes in that house. Only what I chose to carry forward. And as I stood there in the kitchen where he once told me I was too old to be a mom, I felt the smallest shift. Not vindication. Not revenge. Just peace. And the slow realization that the truest things in life don't need anyone's permission to be born. 2 mornings after the wedding, I opened my phone with no expectation. No alerts, no congratulations. Not even gossip. I checked Leela's page first, pure reflex. Gone. The entire account. Her wedding hashtag, which had been live for months, was now just a quiet page not found. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just stillness. Like standing in a room that had been emptied but still held the scent of someone's perfume. No one from Daniel's office said anything either. And if they did, they didn't say it where I could hear. No articles, no headlines, just silence. A silence that said some truths are too complete to argue with. I scrolled past 3 missed calls. Same unknown number. No voicemail, no name. Then came the text. Daniel, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. You didn't have to ruin everything. Asterisk. I stared at it for a moment. Not angry. Not even surprised. The message sounded more like a man who'd lost control of the script. I tapped a few words. Not to sting, not to explain. Just to confirm. Me, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I didn't ruin it. I confirmed it, asterisk. New reply came. New dots. New defense. Just a still screen. Just the rain soft against my window like a lullaby meant only for one person. I stood and walked over to the crib box, still unassembled, still in its cardboard waiting skin. On top of it sat the folded wedding invitation. Not torn, not burned. Just halved. Like the story it tried to tell. That afternoon, I had my checkup at the clinic. Rain had followed me again, tapping gently on the glass doors as I walked in. Like a rhythm from another world, one that didn't care about weddings or news anchors. The receptionist didn't ask where my partner was. Didn't give me a long look or a short one. Just smiled, handed me a clipboard, and said, "Room 3 when you're ready, Meredith." I liked that. No special attention. No pity, just space. Dr. Choi greeted me with her usual calm voice. Like she'd just stepped out of a still lake. "How's the sleeping?" she asked as she placed the cold gel on my belly. I shrugged. As expected. A little worse on rainy nights. She smiled knowingly. I hear that a lot. Then the monitor blinked. And the sound came. That steady rhythmic gallop. My baby's heartbeat. Strong, confident. Unaware of everything that had happened that weekend. I let the sound fill the room, not turning away, not blinking. Just listening. To something real. Something mine. Something no one could spin or deny or take credit for. Dr. Choi adjusted the angle. "Good tone," she said gently. "Really good tone for this stage." I nodded. Didn't trust my voice just yet. Sometimes when you've gone through months of quiet grief, joy doesn't arrive loudly. It enters like a soft breath and waits to see if you'll notice. I did. As I left, Nurse Janelle handed me a folded paper. A copy of the heartbeat reading. "You might want to keep this," she said. "Sometimes it helps on the hard days." I smiled. Not because I needed it, but because I knew I would. It was proof. Not just of life, but of presence. Of becoming. That night, I didn't turn on the television. Didn't scroll. Didn't check to see if Daniel had responded again. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, a chipped mug of chamomile beside me, and opened my laptop. There was no outline. No plan. Just one blinking cursor waiting to catch up with everything I hadn't said out loud. I thought about how it all began. The dinners. The doctor's visits. The forms we signed together. And then the silence. The kind that grows like moss between two people until even words feel like strangers. I'd lived through enough of that. Now I wanted my voice back. So I opened a blank document and typed the title. Motherhood After Permission. Asterisk, asterisk. It sat there for a minute, quiet but certain. Then I began. Not with anger, not with statistics, just the truth. I wrote about trying to conceive at 40. The looks from doctors. The silence from friends. The words people don't say but always imply. Too old, too late, too risky. And yet here I was. Not broken. Not bitter. Just becoming. I didn't name Daniel. Didn't mention the wedding or the cake or the envelope. This wasn't about him. Or them. Or that weekend. This was about me and the small heartbeat I heard that morning. By the time I stopped typing, it was nearly 1 a.m. The cursor blinked under the last sentence. I didn't edit it. Didn't reread it. Just saved the file under one word. Enough. Asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, I almost deleted the email without opening it. The subject line read, "Thank you. From someone who's been watching." Asterisk. Asterisk. No sender name, no company. Just a Gmail address I didn't recognize. My finger hovered over delete. But something in me paused, curious, tired, but open. I clicked. Meredith, you don't know me, but I saw what happened. Not at the wedding, I wasn't there. But I've been in rooms like that, with men like that, where the only thing heavier than the silence was the feeling that no one would ever believe me if I spoke. You gave a lot of us permission to stop pretending. I just wanted you to know, some of us noticed. And some of us finally exhaled because of you. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat there in the kitchen holding my tea like it was something warm and ancient. A part of me wanted to reply. Ask her name. Say thank you back. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood the gift was in the quiet. I read it again. Slower this time. Permission to stop pretending. Asterisk, asterisk. That line. It hit something in me I didn't even know was sore. For so long I'd measured strength by how well I endured. By how quiet I stayed. By how gracefully I swallowed disappointment. But this felt like something better. A woman saw me. Heard me without me raising my voice. Maybe I wasn't the only one walking through fire in a silk dress holding something sacred inside her that no one clapped for. Maybe we were a whole city of women quietly surviving until one voice made it safe to speak. That evening I returned to the document. Same blinking cursor. Same quiet house. But something in me had shifted. I moved the title down the page. Gave myself space. Then typed the first line. Asterisk, asterisk. They said I was too old, I just wasn't too quiet. Asterisk, asterisk. I paused. Let the sentence breathe. Let me breathe. There was power in putting that down. Not because it was clever, but because it was mine. That's what silence had taught me, that reclaiming your voice doesn't always start with shouting. Sometimes it starts with a whisper to yourself that you no longer need to ask permission. The rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a tiny thump, maybe a baby sock falling from the crib box I hadn't opened since the shower invite came. I walked over. Lifted the lid. Inside, a folded onesie. A pair of booties I knitted. And on top, the gold-trimmed wedding invitation. Still sealed. Still heavy. I held it for a long minute, then slid it underneath the crib box. Not out of anger. Just order. I whispered to the air, more for myself than anyone else. This is not your headline. This is just the middle. Then I turned off the light, closed the laptop, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not peace. Not triumph. Just room. Room for what's next. Room for someone who had finally stopped waiting to be chosen to simply choose herself. And mean it. The house is quieter now. Not just because Isla is asleep. Not because no one calls anymore. But because I stopped filling the silence with questions that don't deserve answers. There's a different kind of quiet these days. It doesn't ache. It doesn't echo. It rests. I just finished recording the last lecture for the term. Women in Science and Choice. It was the first time I'd taught the course from home wearing a nursing top holding a baby monitor beside my mug. Rachel, my brightest mentee, stayed behind on Zoom after the others logged off. She leaned forward like her question had been building all semester. Can I ask something a little personal? Her voice was soft. Of course, I said. Is motherhood worth the pause? I let the question hang for a moment. Let it settle into the air. Then I answered. Some things don't pause. They wait until you're ready. She didn't speak for a second, then smiled and said, that makes a lot of sense. I smiled too. Not to reassure her, but because it was true. After we ended the call, I walked into the nursery. Sunlight filtered through linen curtains. There in the crib, Isla lay bundled, one hand peeking out of the blanket, fingers twitching in some infant dream. I picked her up slowly, letting her head rest on my shoulder. In the corner of the room sat the rocking chair I bought secondhand, sanded, painted, softened with cushions I stitched myself. We sat together. No music, no agenda, just skin against cotton, heart against heart. I reached for the copy of The Atlantic on the bookshelf beside us. The page was already creased, but the ink still bold. My op-ed. Printed, tangible. I read aloud, not for Isla to understand, but for me to remember. They said I was too old. They said I was too alone. But none of them were there the night my daughter's heartbeat thudded steady against the ultrasound speaker. None of them saw the IV needle, or the tissue box, or the string of nights I whispered her name before she even had one. This was never revenge. This was a reclamation of time, of truth, of motherhood. I closed the magazine gently. On the fridge downstairs, the embryo photo still hung, but now Isla's picture sat right beside it, both faces full of promise. In the hallway mirror, as I passed by with her in my arms, I stopped for just a second. I looked at my reflection, a woman in loose jeans with circles under her eyes and milk stains on her shoulder. And then I saw something else. Isla stirred slightly, opened her eyes, and looked into the mirror too. For the first time, we both smiled at the same reflection. Not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. We didn't need anyone's permission. Not anymore. And as I opened the front door, strapped her gently into the carrier, and stepped out into the spring air, I felt the breeze like a welcome. The cherry trees had begun to bloom. Their petals fell slow, not rushed, not forced. Just in time. At the park, I walked slowly along the path, Isla's breath warm against my collarbone. A couple passed us with a stroller. Another woman jogged by with earbuds in. No one looked twice. No one needed to. But if someone had stopped me, asked me why I walked alone, what I had lost or gained, I might have said this. I didn't lose anything. I remembered everything. We sat on a bench beneath a willow tree. The air was sweet with morning. I pulled out the folded wedding invitation from my coat pocket, the one I'd saved creased once. I placed it in the diaper bag, behind wipes and a bottle. Not to forget. Just to file away. Because some stories end not with a scream, but with the sound of a child's breath against your skin. No more proving. No more waiting. No more asking for a seat at the table. I built my own table. And now there are 2 chairs. One for me, and one for Isla. Just enough room for what matters. Maybe the most surprising thing was realizing I didn't need an apology. Just a quiet morning, my daughter's smile reflected back at me, and the peace of knowing I'd come through it whole. In life, not everyone will choose you first. But if you're brave enough to choose yourself last, that can still be a beautiful beginning. Because love doesn't require permission, it only asks that you stop waiting. If this story stirred something in you, share a truth you've been holding in, and choose a day to let it go. For you.